This episode contains graphic depictions of violence. Listener discretion is advised. Month number 1. It's the night of January 21st, 1911, and we're in Atlanta, Georgia, an up-and-coming railroad town with a population of about 150,000. Here is what we know about that Saturday night. It was cloudy, cold but not freezing, and it was likely storming. We know that because one of the local Atlanta newspapers called for unsettled weather earlier that day. From lunar records, we know the moon was waning that night, about half full. This was a fairly dark night in Georgia's capital city. By sundown, that unsettled weather had descended upon the streets of Inman Park, a newly built, wealthy suburb just a few miles from downtown Atlanta. Inman Park was the new it neighborhood and had been attracting some of the most prestigious white families in the city. This was the neighborhood of governors, university presidents, and newspaper editors. And it was also home to one of the most recognizable names in Atlanta social circles, the Candlers. In the 1880s, the patriarch of the Candler family, Asa, bought the recipe of a popular new drink that featured a small amount of cocaine as a prominent ingredient. Candler got the recipe for a steal, around $2,000, from its creator, a desperate chemist who, unsurprisingly, was dying of a cocaine addiction. That drink, of course, was Coca-Cola. By the early 1900s, Inman Park was filled with Candlers and therefore filled with Coca-Cola money. Wanting to appeal to other elite families like the Candlers, the developer of Inman Park spared no expense, ensuring the neighborhood had all the latest amenities. Trolley car access, sewer, gas, and water lines, as well as the newest neighborhood luxury, electric street lamps. On this particularly dark and thundery night, the neighborhood street lamps must have provided a comforting glow for the well-dressed ladies and gentlemen coming home from their Saturday evening socials. Two other well-known residents of Inman Park were the Reverend Wilbur Fisk Glenn and his wife Flora. Wilbur was a Confederate veteran who'd spent the last 44 years as a Methodist minister. In 1890, the couple built a magnificent Victorian home in the neighborhood. I've seen pictures of the house from back in the day, and it's stunning. All white, Victorian woodwork, stained glass, wraparound porch. It soared 3 stories tall and had an open-air tower on top. The Glenns had 8 children, so they sort of needed a big house. If you think raising kids is hard now, consider this. One of the Glenn sons, Frank, died as an infant, only living a few weeks. 3 of the Glenn kids contracted typhoid fever and nearly died. Then their 15-year-old daughter, Mary, got typhoid, but she did die. Their son, Sidney, contracted scarlet fever when he was about 3, but he recovered. However, as a 16-year-old, Sidney sustained a gruesome injury while working on a railroad in Atlanta. In his memoir, his father wrote of the accident, quote, "On August 5th, 1899, Sidney in some way came in contact with a great steel fan and had his right arm cut off above the elbow," end quote. Sidney would suffer with pain for the rest of his life. Now, all that was years earlier. By the time of this dark and stormy night in 1911, the Glenn children were all grown and living out of the house. Reverend Glenn was 72 years old and had just retired from 4 decades of ministry in the Methodist Church. We don't know exactly what the Glenns were doing on this particular night, but we can make some pretty good guesses. Though it was cold and stormy outside, it was warm and cozy inside. We can imagine a fire burning in one of the home's fireplaces as electric lights cast a soft glow on the walls of the elegant home. From his autobiography, we know that around this time, Reverend Glenn was recovering from some kind of surgical operation. Perhaps that night, Ms. Glenn served a meal or some hot tea to her feeble husband. From all accounts, the Glenns had a pretty special relationship. The Reverend Glenn once wrote about Flora, quote, "No man or preacher ever had a more helpful wife, and no children ever had a better or more devoted mother," end quote. It's likely the Glenns enjoyed another modern luxury, a record player. Perhaps the Glenns listened to some music in their parlor that night. One of the most popular songs in America in 1911 was By the Light of the Silvery Moon by Billy Murray and the Haydn Quartet.
Hot, beam, dark, silvery moon is shining through the trees.
It's sort of a cheesy love song you'd expect your grandparents to like. Weirdly, the song mentions spooning, and I would have thought spooning was invented probably in the 1960s. While the elder Glynns enjoyed a warm and quiet night at home, they had no clue about the terrible thing that was about to happen just a bit south, though they'd read about it in the newspaper. My name is B.T. Harman, and you're listening to Episode 2 of Catlick, By the Light of the Silvery Moon. On this very same night, a very different scene was unfolding just a few miles south of the Glynns' home. Due to the clouds, there was no silvery moon illuminating the streets of Pittsburgh, a poor suburb of working-class African Americans south of downtown Atlanta. That night, Rosa Trice, a black woman, is walking towards her home there. As she walks, it's possible Rosa can see the dim lights of the Atlanta skyline shimmering in the distance, just a few miles north. While the streets of downtown Atlanta would have been illuminated by street lamps, it would be decades before Pittsburgh would have any kind of outdoor lighting. We know that Rosa lived on Gardner Street, and as she walked that night, she likely saw the glow of gas lamps dancing through the windows of the many shanties lining her street. With a dimly lit moon, heavy cloud cover, and no street lights, we know for certain this was a very, very dark night in the little community of Pittsburgh. As Rosa walks, the sound of trains can be heard, slowly lumbering through the night. One of Atlanta's great railroad lines served as the eastern border of her neighborhood. It still does today. We don't know why Rosa is out on this stormy night, but it's probably safe to assume she's returning home from work. During this time, one of the only jobs a black woman could hold in Atlanta was that of domestic servant. As Rosa walks, she suddenly hears the quick shuffle of approaching footsteps on wet earth. She spins around to see who it is. As she does, she's struck in the face, a hot sting as the blade of a knife is thrust into her jaw. She screams and pulls away. As she staggers backwards, she's struck with a devastating blow to the back of her head. It cracks her skull. Bleeding and losing her vision, Rosa falls to the ground, twisting her body in pain. Her attacker, towering over her, tightens his grip on a long knife, now slick with blood. He slowly bends down and plunges it into her neck, dragging it laterally across her throat. As Rosa takes her last breath, he grabs her by the foot and drags her for some distance until, for reasons we don't know, abandons her mangled body in the middle of the street. After this, our unknown killer slips into the night. In Inman Park, the rain continues to fall as the Glynns crawl into bed and fall asleep to the sound of a crackling fire. In Pittsburgh, the rain also falls as a woman begins her final sleep. Blood pools around her body, commingling with rain in Georgia soil. Rosa Trice is dead, and one of America's very first serial killers has begun his campaign of death. My name is B.T. Harman, and you're listening to Catlick.
With you underneath the silvery moon, by the light of the silvery moon, I wonder.
Catlick is recorded in Atlanta's historic Cabbagetown neighborhood. It's written and produced by me, B.T. Harman. Executive producer, Walnut Ridge Harman. Original music and sound design by Ciel. If you're feeling this story, be sure to let us know by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to great podcasts. It makes a huge difference. And remember, you can subscribe to the Catlick Vault at catlick.com. This is B.T. Harman, reminding you to save old buildings, build bike lanes, and vote for public transit. I'll see you in the next episode.